Okay, so somebody's the time? Yeah, go ahead. Okay, all right. Well, how you doing? Good afternoon, everybody. Good afternoon. How about we do this? I'm gonna clap. You want to clap with me real quick? Clap once. Clap once. Clap twice. 3 times. We all come. Okay, we're on the same page here. So, good afternoon, everybody. I want to wish you a Merry Christmas, Happy Holidays, Happy Kwanzaa, etc. I might need a mic. That's good. All right, so I want to thank you for having me here today. I want to say that I think it's good that it's raining outside. You've noticed that. That's going to help us to get all that ice off before everyone. So, yeah, well, hopefully it does. You're right about that. It's supposed to be warm, though. It's like 55 degrees right now, so I guess we might be good on that. President Brunson, good to see you, sir. Merry Christmas, everybody. Oh, yeah. So good afternoon, everybody, and thank you for allowing me the opportunity to speak with you today about license revoked, grading state laws on police certification based on the CAP method. Unless we have a remote, I'm going to have to change the slides. I can't be there. Yeah, I apologize. But as you can see, I got a nice slide to be on. So, my name is Carlton T. Manson, second Esquire. I'm a national community development and safety expert. I'm also the CEO, founder, and owner of Mayor Strategic Solutions LLC. And I'm going to let y'all know, even though in Chicago out here, I'm as a volunteer, I am the criminal justice chair for the Chicago West Side branch of NAACP. President Brinson, if you just saw, I work with him very closely on Chicago's consent decree, etc. For today, I do not have my NAACP hat on. I have my hat on as CEO, founder, and owner of Mayor Strategic Solutions LLC. So I want to make sure I'm clear on that from the get-go. So what I do is I work with communities around the country on essentially how they can become more empowered, right, on a local level, so that they're now able to, on their own, address their own community development and safety challenges, rather than relying, and I'm going to emphasize this, rather than relying on the federal government, okay? Because I think at this point, after having, now it's going to be 8 years of this person in the White House, that we've seen that there's no guarantee that any kind of progress, even if it is had in this country, will last, especially for black people, okay? Our ancestors knew that. Okay, we've already had 3 civil rights movements. Our ancestors knew that, and they acted accordingly. A good example, back in the day, we're talking about in the first civil rights era, okay, even in slavery, etc., individuals did not try to register people to vote publicly. Why? Because you would be publicly lynched. So what did our ancestors do to make sure they got black people registered to vote? They held Bible studies. That's what they did. They were Bible studies that were not really Bible studies. They were actually registering people to vote in their homes because they knew if they did it out in public, they were going to be publicly lynched. So what I'm saying is, there's a lot that we can learn from the past. There's a lot that we can learn from our ancestors, from our own DNA, because it's in our DNA, okay? And all it's about is how do we take from the past and bring it here to the present, so that now we're utilizing the same skills, the same expertise, the same tactics that our ancestors used, but we're also using technology, okay? They didn't have technology back then. And I can only imagine if our ancestors lived now, with all the technology we have, they would be doing a lot of stuff and not relying on the federal government to do it. So that's what I do. I try to utilize what is it that we've learned from the past. How can we bring it here to the present? And then how can we use what we have at our disposal right now so that we are empowered as black people to take care of our communities for the future? So what I'm going to talk about today is specifically police accountability. Okay, because we already know the DOJ, they're not doing that stuff anymore. We have a consent decree, but at the end of the day, we don't know if that consent decree will continue going into next year, especially now that we know that right now there might be a Chicago government shutdown because we're trying to figure out this over $1 billion deficit, how are we going to pay it off, okay? So we may not have a consent decree because this consent decrees cost money. If the city does not have money to pay for the consent decree, then that means the consent decree will not happen, period. That's how consent decrees operate. So we have to be prepared for if something like that were to happen, how do we still hold our officers whose pension, salaries are being paid for 100% from our tax-paying dollars? Okay? I'm very proud of the fact that I live in a democracy and I don't live in Russia. I don't live in China.
Right.
Okay? I'm very proud of that. Even though we have our issues here, it would be a lot worse if we were in those countries.
In at least 4 years, we might be in Russia.
And that's why we have to start preparing now, because that's what our ancestors would be doing. Okay? We have to go back to that. We have to get back in that mindset. Because at the end of the day, what this guy's doing, what his people are doing, I'm going to tell you right now, they don't care about us. They've already let us know that. We have to care about us. So the question is, how do we do that? And how do we do that now? Not last year, not next year, right now. So that's what I do is I provide content, I provide resources that allow community members all around the country, not just here in Chicago, all around the country to be able to, on their own, use those resources to come up with your own solutions based on the resources you have in your backyard. You're not looking at what, Springfield is going to do or what another city like New York is going to do. No, we're going to see what do we already have going on here in Chicago, which a lot of you already talked about today. Like you talked about your organization, the work that you're all doing. We already heard about some other organizations. We heard from the district councilors. There's a lot of resources already in Chicago, in the community, that has nothing to do with the federal government. Okay? So there's already a lot we can work with. The question is, how do we do it, knowing that we're about to go through some of the most difficult times that this country has ever gone through? Okay? So that's what I'm here to talk about today, only as it relates to police accountability. I have a whole other presentation I've already done in Chicago a few weeks ago, where I talk about how we can navigate the state and local impacts of the federal funding cuts, meaning, the ARPA money is going away, Medicaid is going away, SNAP is going away, public education funding is going away, money for gun violence intervention at pursuit in crisis, all of that is going away. All of that money came from the federal government. Okay? So I have a separate presentation if you're interested in that. DeAndre already knows, Arewa already knows that I've been doing it. I can always come back here and do that one for you as well, where we talk about that specifically and what we can do for the next at least 3 years. We have at least 3 more years of this, okay? To navigate those cuts so that locally, not the federal government, we're relying on our resources that we can get through this together, all right? So what I'm going to talk about today is police accountability. I'm not talking about the federal funding cuts. So on that note, what I do specifically, so you know exactly the way I operate, is that I've developed a methodology. So I've been doing this work for over 15 years. I used to direct NAACP National Criminal Justice Reform Program out of Baltimore, back when Ben Jealous was the president. After him, President Cornell William Brooks. I co-authored NAACP's Born Suspect, Ending Racial Profiling Report, published in 2014, provides all kind of information on how to end racial profiling by state and local police. I also worked at NAACP Legal Defense and Educational Fund Incorporated, Thurgood Marshall's law firm. I was an attorney there as policy counsel for the policing reform campaign. In that role, for at least 3 years, I worked on the Ferguson, Missouri, and Baltimore, Maryland consent decrees. I also lobbied on the Hill for federal policing reform legislation, a lot of which is now incorporated in the George Floyd Justice and Policing Act. And then lastly, for at least 5 years, at both NAACP National and Legal Defense Fund, I worked very closely with President Barack Obama's administration, specifically with his DOJ and his White House, most notably, and this is on policing reform initiatives as a whole, most notably the 21st Century Policing Task Force report recommendations. So with all that experience, around the country working with different black communities, what I've learned is that there is no one-size-fits-all approach when it comes to solutions. Every community is different. Even here in Illinois, you have Chicago, you got Rockford, you got Joliet, you got Springfield, you got Peoria. All of them are under the same state law, but any kind of solutions are going to look different because you got to take into consideration the nuances, like the culture, the history, the demographics. All of that stuff has to align with any kind of solutions if you want long-term, sustainable solutions. And you don't want short-term snapshot solutions, okay? So that's what I do is I help communities focus on how are we going to do this so that it's ours. We can own it and move forward on it together. And the way I do that is I developed this methodology here. Oh, what's that showing up like that? DeAndre, I don't know if they
Something went wrong.
Oh.
Try again in a few seconds.
Wait, is the name of your AI your name? No, but okay, well, thank you for saying that, AI. But, yo, listen, y'all, better get used to it. That's all I gotta say. There's gonna be a lot more of this happening starting next year. So, what I've done is I've developed this methodology that I call the CAT method. So, I'm gonna break it down for you real quick. First, we have 3 components of the CAT method. Each one needs to be achieved in order for the CAT method to be successful. The first component is community empowerment. This entails community members who are living in neighborhoods, areas, and zip codes in the community where you have high levels of violence, like gun violence, domestic violence. You also have issues around environmental, you have issues around education, issues around healthcare, in crisis mental health, drug addiction, etc. While you have all those issues going on in those communities, in those zip codes and areas, you also have a history of negative police interaction, like racial profiling, excessive use of force, etc. So all of that stuff is happening in these communities at the same time. So the people that live in those communities are dealing with it. How do I stay safe from criminals and from law enforcement who are acting like criminals? So I focus on how do we make sure that those particular individuals, in those zip codes and those blocks and those areas, are number 1, involved in it. Number 2, have knowledge of it. And number 3, have some level of decision-making authority over all direct police-civilian interactions, like stops, arrests, reports, surveillance technology, the way protests are handled, etc. The reason being is that the people closest to the problems are also the people closest to the solution. So we want to have long-term solutions for long-term challenges. We need to make sure that the people most directly impacted by community development and safety challenges are at the helm of decision-making, working with law enforcement and other community safety stakeholders as one community. Now, the next component is accountability. This involves creating an inhospitable environment for those who engage in misconduct by establishing both internal and external accountability mechanisms that work together. And then last but not least, we have transparency, which I define as the interconnectedness amongst what I call the 4 aspects of the community, as you're going to see here on the next slide. So first we have law enforcement. That includes the sheriff's office, state and local police like ISP, right, CCSO, CPD, etc. Okay? Going out? Whoa, what just happened? Okay, thank you. All right. Sorry about that. I got kicked out by AI. It's like, I don't like what you're saying. I know, right? What's going on here? There we go. Okay. Okay, we already said law enforcement. Next, we have elected and appointed government officials, like your aldermen and alderwomen. Right now, they're working on that budget, trying to figure out what we're going to do about that $1 billion deficit. They don't know what they're going to do, but they know whatever happens next year, everybody's going to have to spend less. Everybody's going to have to cut in Chicago next year, no matter what they come up with. So that's going to be interesting to see how that plays out. So we have them as well. They're a part of the community. So are their staff and employees. Next, we have community members, like yourselves. So directly impacted individuals, community-based orgs, direct service providers, faith-based organizations, private business, etc. And then last but not least, we have the local press and news media. So according to my definition of transparency, all 4 of these aspects of the community need to work together through interconnectedness and coordination as one community to support community development and safety and ensure public accountability through more so proactive rather than reactive strategies. So that's what we're going to talk about today is what does this look like when we're talking about police accountability. So before we go into the topic being decertification, I do want to ask for a show of hands. How many people in here know what decertification of police is? Raise your hand. Okay, we got two. We got three. Okay. Anybody else raise your hand? If not, that's fine. Okay, so we got about 3, maybe 4, 3.5.
At least we don't. At least
Okay.
I can say I was like process those.
So just understand this. Y'all are not alone. This is what it looks like all around the country. Most people don't realize that there's another lever of accountability in our toolkit outside of, or in addition to, criminal liability, civil liability, administrative liability, meaning you fire the officer from employment, right? We also have another tool here called decertification. Now, before I put in what it is exactly, I just want to tell you the way that I talk about it to people. So for instance, I'm an attorney. I have a license to practice law, okay? A doctor has a license to practice medicine. The same thing applies to law enforcement. They have a license or what they call certification that allows law enforcement to be a police officer in that state and to do a few things. Number one, they can transfer from one law enforcement agency to another. That's important. If you're a police officer, you want to leave one job, you want to go to another one, you need a license in order to do that, okay? In order to arrest people, in order to use force on people, and to get all those protections and privileges of the police union contract under U.S. Supreme Court law, etc., you need certification. You need a license. So, if an officer has their license revoked for misconduct, meaning you lose your license, you get decertified. Okay? What that means is you're not able to transfer from one law enforcement agency to another. Number one. That also means you're not able to arrest people and use force and get all those protections. So if you do arrest somebody, then they can only do what you and I can do, a citizen's arrest. If you do use force on somebody and you want to claim some kind of defense, they can only do what you and I do, regular self-defense. So you see how much power that certification has and how much power there is in decertifying, taking that away. Because once you do that, in my opinion, the way I see it is that what real accountability means when we're talking about police accountability, what it means is not necessarily that we lock you up, right? Because you can get locked up, which is hard to do because it's hard to get a prosecutor to indict. And even if they indict them, it's hard to get a conviction because the jury pool usually doesn't. They always think that officers do everything right no matter what, right? So it's very hard to get a group of people to say unanimously, this officer is guilty. And then even if you do get a guilty verdict, it's even harder to get a sentence from a judge that actually meets the criminal act. So they're not going to spend that same amount of time in jail that somebody from your home who might commit something similar would do, okay? They're not going to spend years like that in jail. Look at the guy that killed Laquan McDonald. He's already out. Okay, he's already out. Okay, so, and we already saw what he did on camera. Something like that, you should probably be locked up for life, in my opinion. But he's already out. So the fact of the matter is that these people can still be criminally held liable, come out, and potentially still be a police officer. They could be potentially held civilly liable, which is hard to do, to hold somebody civilly liable for money damages, because you have qualified immunity, which then makes it hard to hold them liable. And let's say you can't hold an officer liable. Okay, number one, police don't make that much money. So if you sue them for $1 million, you're not getting that money. They're going to be considered judgment proof. That means you're going to have to go after the police agency where they work at. And guess what? Most police departments, including Chicago PD, have an agreement with the municipality that if they ever get sued, one of two things can happen. Either the budget, the police department pays it out of their budget and then they get reimbursed by the city, or they don't pay anything out of their budget and it comes 100% out of the city's budget, which means who's paying for it?
That's
right. Thank you. Which is the same thing that happens when individuals file lawsuits for misconduct of law enforcement. You get a lawsuit settlement, who's paying for that? Taxpayers. We're paying for it. So that's not real accountability, okay? And then even if you fire them, let's say you fire an officer. Okay, you fire them. Now they have a right under police union contract to initiate the grievance procedure, meaning that they can take their case to arbitration. Studies have already shown arbiters tend to favor law enforcement. So more than likely, they're going to get their job back, they're going to get their back pay, they're also going to get their pension back, and then you know what they're going to do? They're going to say, I quit. They're going to go to another law enforcement agency, still continue to be a police officer, keep their pension, etc. That's not real accountability. To me, real accountability means that you're not going to ever again be able to harass, victimize anyone and no other family members ever again. The buck stops here. And that's what decertification allows for. Because when you take away that license, they cannot go to another police department. They cannot have those protections and privileges to arrest you, to use force, and get away with it. So that's how we get that buck to stop here. We gotta start utilizing this lever that we have in our toolkit more. And that's the thing, is most people don't even know about it, and that's why they're not using it. So what I'm trying to do is educate people on the power you already have under state law, not federal law, okay? So he ain't got nothing to do with this. Let's make sure that we keep him right over there. This is us. This is our state. We are taxpayers. We live in a democracy. We don't live in Russia and China. We have a say over how you treat us because we're paying for it. That's what our democracy, that's how it operates. It's a capitalist democracy. You pay for something, then you have a say over how they treat you. You go to McDonald's, you go to a car dealership, somebody gives you a nasty attitude, you have every right to say, I want to speak to your supervisor, I want to file a complaint, and something will get done. But with law enforcement, there seems to be an exception to that rule. And to me, that's not democratic. That's China. That's Russia. And I don't want to live in that place. So if we don't want that to happen, like what you said earlier, we're going in that direction. We have to start making movements now, locally, to ensure that we keep our power right here, and we don't give it to that guy over there. Okay? So now that I've said all that, I want to now dig into what exactly decertification is, as it is on the slide here. So, as you can see, and I know it's some of this, a certification or license provides a law enforcement officer with his or her authority, including the authority to carry and use a firearm and make arrests as a law enforcement officer. Revoking this license, also called decertification, takes away this authority from law enforcement officers. Most importantly, decertification ensures police accountability by preventing a law enforcement officer who is engaged in misconduct from transferring from one law enforcement agency to another and thus becoming a wandering officer. So wandering officer is what I said earlier. You can have an officer who engages in misconduct in one police department. When they come under investigation, they resign. Now they go to another police department, they're never held accountable, and then they're able to continue being a police officer engaging in misconduct in different places. We've already seen this happen with some of the most notable cases that we've heard of. Number one, Eric Gardner in New York City. That former officer who killed him, he bounced around at least to 3 different NYPD precincts, engaging in misconduct in each one of them, and all they ever did was reassign him, transfer him. They didn't actually hold him to account, and ultimately he ended up in Long Island, and we all saw when he killed Eric Gardner with the chokehold. Okay? Another notable incident involving wandering officers, Ferguson, Missouri. So the officer who killed Mike Brown, before he was in Ferguson at their police department, he was at another police department where he engaged in misconduct. He was under investigation. He resigned while under investigation, and then he got the job in Ferguson, and we already know what happened to Mike Brown at that point. More recently, Breonna Taylor in Louisville, Kentucky. So you know there were 3 officers involved in her death. One of those officers who was found to have killed her, he got fired from the Louisville Metropolitan Police Department for killing her. After being fired, some months later, he was able to get a job at the sheriff's office in the adjacent county. And so now he's a deputy at that office. And so now Breonna Taylor's mother, family, and friends are seeing this guy patrolling that area, knowing that he killed Breonna Taylor and got away with it. Okay, so the idea of a wandering officer is nothing new. This has been going on for a while. And the only thing that can prevent these officers from transferring from one agency to another, engaging in misconduct without any accountability, is to decertify them. Okay? And that's state law, not federal. State. So we have the power over that, not that guy. Okay? So I just want to make sure I emphasize that with you. And then, all right, let me move on to the next slide. Okay, so now that we have a sense of what decertification is and why it's important, I want us to also talk about who is responsible for decertifying law enforcement. In other words, which state agency is responsible for doing that. So, as you can see here, it says the Peace Officers Standards and Trainings Commission is also called POST. That is the state entity generally who's responsible for holding, for decertifying and certifying all law enforcement in a state. Now, who is that here in Illinois? Well, Illinois is called, there we go. So, Peace Officers Training Commission is typically responsible for certifying, licensing, and decertifying, also called revoking license, all state and local law enforcement. Illinois Post Commission is called the Illinois Law Enforcement Training and Standards Board, also called ILETSB, which is the acronym. And ILETSB is independent, meaning ILETSB is not under the State Attorney General's office. They do not rely on their budget from the State Attorney General. They have their own budget, their own power, their own autonomy. They do everything on their own, which is good, because that means they fall under the Open Meetings Act. You know what that is? The Open Meetings Act in Illinois? Right. So the Open Meetings Act, that's a democratic tool, a mechanism. That allows all of us as taxpayers to be a part of the democratic process. When you have state entities that are taxpayer funded, when they hold their meetings, they have to let you know when those meetings are happening, where they're happening, how they're going to be accessible to you, if you have a disability, etc. They have to send you the agenda in advance for that meeting. They have to send you the minutes after the meeting has occurred. They have to allow you public comment during that meeting. This is what democracy is about. Okay? We have to utilize what it is, because if we don't, that guy, he's going to be like it's gone. We're going to be China and Russia now. Okay? We're not doing that. At least I'm not. And I hope y'all are not too. So we got to start using what's already on the books if we want to sustain it and keep it. We can't just let it go. So it's important to understand that ILETSB falls under the Open Meetings Act. So we have a right to show up to those meetings, find out what's going on, provide public comment. And if they don't allow us to do it, they get in trouble. Okay? Because that's the law. They have to do that. So, okay. This is what I'm going to do right quick. So I want to get right into it. So we all know about what happened 5 years ago, right? In 2020, Breonna Taylor, George Floyd, etc. We had a lot of, especially black people, that were killed on camera and posted on the internet by law enforcement unjustifiably, which then resulted in the largest civil rights protest and the longest civil rights protest ever in U.S. history, potentially global, because it did go global, okay? We still have not seen protests that big. Even with the No Kings protests, still have not been as big as the ones we had 5 years ago, okay? Same Black Lives Matter. So, resulting from those protests, almost every state across the country passed comprehensive policing reform legislation in response to the demands of protesters to defund, to do something about police accountability, to reimagine public safety, etc. Now, what that resulted in is that a lot of states passed laws related to this topic, decertification. Why did they do that? Because both community members and law enforcement agree that law enforcement should not be thugs with badges. They need to be professional. And what makes you a professional is that you have standards for your profession and you have something that proves that you are in compliance with your standards. That's what a license is. That's what a certification is. So it's very important for law enforcement that they have this and that they promote it so that it makes them look better. Okay? So we got a lot of support all around the country to get these laws passed. Because of that, now, this is the first time in U.S. history that almost every state, 49, we only have one state that hasn't done it, 49 states now have a law on the books that allows for decertification of law enforcement. That has never been the case ever in U.S. history until now. The only state that doesn't have one is Rhode Island. I don't know why they don't. Even all the southern states have it. I don't know what's going on in Rhode Island, but they do not. Either way, well, you know, there's history there. But what I can say is this, is that because of that, that now provided an opportunity for somebody to do a national assessment of all of those laws and look at them and say, okay, based on the language in the law, does this law allow for mechanisms and processes so that civilians, like yourself, civilian oversight authorities, like the DCs back there, like CCPSA, like COPA, like the OIG, like the police board, okay? Does it allow for all of you to be able to meaningfully engage in the decertification process here in the state of Illinois? So what I did is I looked at each of those states and I graded them based on 9 different categories to determine, are you providing for democratic processes under your state law? So for instance, I'm going to go through each one of them just to give you an example. One thing I asked is, can civilians like yourselves file a complaint directly with the state entity responsible for decertifying law enforcement, and can that complaint result in an officer then being decertified? Okay? That, to me, if a law allows you, the taxpayer, to be able to say, hey, so on and so forth is mistreating me, I'm filing a complaint, I'm a taxpayer, I'm paying for them, I have every right to do that. I think that's a good thing. That, to me, is democratic. Okay? If they're not allowing you to do that, then I think that's undemocratic. So what I did is, when there were things like that that were more democratic, I gave it a check, if the state law allows for it. If the state law did not allow for it, I gave it an X. And then if I was doing my research and I was not able to find something in writing, if it's a state law, administrative code, the website itself of the state entity, the Post Commission, saying we do this or we don't do this, then I gave it a question mark. Because to me, if I'm a taxpayer, I shouldn't have to call you to have you tell me over the phone something that's not in writing. I need it to be in writing so that if I have to go to somebody else, I can say, hey, if you go to this website, you go to this, it's here, it's concrete, it's tangible. It's not something you can say, oh, I never said that. You see what's going on right now with the president? Like, oh, he said this and that. No, I never said that. I know what you're talking about. I never said that, right? Because it's not in writing, right? It's not in writing. You got to put things in writing, okay? So that's what I did. So what I'm going to do with y'all right now is this. What I'm going to do with y'all right now is this. I'm going to go through Illinois on the report card, and I'm going to show you the different kinds of mechanisms and tools that you have at your disposal under state law. We ain't got nothing to do with him, okay? So that now we're empowered to continue to move the ball forward for the next 3 years at least, while we're dealing with whatever we're dealing with. It's not going to get any better. I'm going to tell you that right now. Okay, so we got to be prepared for what we can do with what we have at our disposal to continue to move the ball forward, like our ancestors did when they had to do them Bible studies that were not really Bible studies. Okay, so number one thing, okay, real quick before I also do that, you see these numbers here in the lower right-hand corner? So you cannot? Okay. Well, there's a number there in the lower right-hand corner. What I also, something else you could do, and I don't know, you know, you'll have your cell phones on you. If you want to look at the report card that I'm talking about, you can scan that QR code. It will take you right to the webpage on my website where you can download the report card for free, and you can look at all this on your own or share it with other people. So that lower right-hand corner where that number is, within the report card packet that I published a few months ago on this, there's an endnote section where anything in here, if you're looking at, you're like, where did you get that information from? Like, how do I know that what you're saying is actually true? That number corresponds with the number in the endnote section where you can find the citation for where you can find that information. So if you want to look it up yourself, it's right there, copy and paste it, put it in your search engine, it will come up. The website, the law, the administrative code, and then you will see it right in front of you right there. So I made sure to do all the research for you, and that way you didn't have to do it yourself, okay? Trying to make it as easy as possible for people. So, number one we have here, are meetings accessible to the public? What does that mean? What that means is when ILESB, the Post Commission, when they hold their open meetings, their standing meetings, are those meetings only accessible online, meaning that you have to have internet access? Are they only accessible in person, meaning that you're going to have a vehicle, potentially, and time, being able to actually show up in person instead of doing something else? And so if it's either or, I gave that an X. And I gave a check if they provide for both. Why? Because in my opinion, a democratic process should allow for as many members of the public to participate in it, okay? And we live in a post-COVID era, meaning that during COVID, everybody was doing stuff virtually. So we have the capability of doing hybrid meetings, okay? So ILESB, right now, the reason why they got an X, Illinois, they only provide their meetings in person. They do not provide their meetings virtually. And so because of that, if you're somebody who doesn't have a vehicle, you don't have time to show up, you're not going to be able to show up to the meetings, find out what's going on with decertification in the state of Illinois, and provide public comment on the records, okay? And that to me is not democratic, because the only way that government, okay, gotcha. The only way that government agencies move is when we show up to their meetings, we let them know we're watching you, we let them know that we provide public comment on the record, we let them know what we want, and the more you do that, the more likely that they're going to start changing the way they behave, the way that they practice. But when you don't show up to their meetings, and they don't see you, they don't hear from you, then they're just going to do what they do, okay? So, you know, we can't complain about a state entity like LS be like, oh, they don't really do anything, I never heard of them. Well, are you showing up to their meetings? Okay, that's the question you need to ask. Because if you're not showing up, then you can't blame them for doing what they're doing if you're not putting the pressure on them. That's how democracy works. You got to put the pressure in order to get the change. That's why we have voting. Got to put the pressure in order to get the change. So I gave them an X because they only hold their meetings in person. They do not offer them online. So only people that are able to show up in person can show up to their meetings, and that's not democratic. Do meetings occur often? Meaning, are meetings occurring once a month? Meaning you have 12 bites at the apple to show up, find out what's going on, provide public comment, or are they only happening like once every other, or once every 3 months? Meaning you only have 4 bites at the apple, right? And so Illinois, they offer their meetings once every quarter, meaning 4 times a year. That's the only time you can show up to an ILSP meeting, find out what's going on with decertification, and provide public comment. In my opinion, if it's fewer than 6 times a year, meaning half the year, then that's not enough for in a democratic process to be able to allow people time to show up, find out what's going on, and provide public comment. So, and that would be 6 times a year, would be every other month to have a standing meeting. And so I gave Illinois X on that, because it's only 4 times a year. That's not enough. Can civilians file complaints? Yes. Now the reason why I know I got like maybe 8 minutes left. The reason why I want to hone in on this for the DCs to listen to, okay? Because I've been meeting with your counterparts in Minneapolis and Louisville, Kentucky about this. So there's already a lot of talk locally about how this report card can help you build your own mechanisms to continue the ball on police accountability. So what this allows for, the fact that civilians and civilian oversight authorities can file that complaint with ILSB and initiate the decertification process, what that means is that you have a bunch of options. You can create, as civilians, your own local mechanism where you determine, okay, we get complaints about CCSO, about CPD. Does this rise to decertifiable conduct under Illinois state law? You can create a triage system for that. And then at that point decide, should we then send this to COPA? Should we send it to the OIG? Should we send it to CCPSA or the DCs? Or should we just send it directly to ILSP and file the complaint with them? The other thing it does is for the DCs, it now allows them an opportunity that when you receive complaints, you can now determine, does this rise to decertifiable conduct? Do we file the complaint with ILSP, or do we give it to COPA? Do we give it to the OIG or the CCPSA to then do that? The whole point is that there's opportunity that people that did not exist before, okay? So you know, we talked about how we have like at least four different civilian oversight authorities, which we're like the only city in the country to have that. Well, what are we doing with them, okay? Like, there needs to be more glue with how they operate. Remember I talked about interconnectedness and coordination, right? Being transparency. There needs to be more transparency in Chicago around how the civilian oversight authorities operate and how civilians are operating with them. And this, to me, provides an opportunity for that to be built out under state law, okay? Not federal. We ain't dealing with him. This is us. Under state law. So, you know, that's something that we can talk about at a later date, but I just wanted to let you know, state law allows you to do that. How you're going to do it, you have to figure that out. And I'd love to work with you on building that out. Also, are civilians involved in the decision-making process? Meaning, does ILSP have civilians on it, or is there like another committee that works with ILSP who has civilians on it that also have decision-making authority? The answer is yes. ILSP does not have civilians. It only has former law enforcement, former prosecutors, and former judges, which is sad, but that's the current state. However, there is a separate panel called the Law Enforcement Certification Review Panel. It was created by the Safety Act in 2021, and it does have civilians on it. They do play a role in the decision-making process of an officer losing their license or not. And it does require that a number of those community members have to come from neighborhoods where there's high levels of gun violence, high levels of child poverty, high levels of unemployment, high commitments to Illinois Department of Corrections, etc. So these are not formal law enforcement, these are not spouses or family members of law enforcement, so that's a good thing. Does ILSP have the power to investigate complaints independent of the law enforcement agency where the accused officer worked at? The answer is no. That's going to require state law to be amended in order to change that, but right now, if there's a case, like if you initiate a complaint with ILSP is going to have their investigators go to that police department, being Chicago PD, and say, you hear about this complaint, we need you to investigate it, let us know what the results are in 7 days. They will then look at their report and then look at any other information they have, and then they'll decide if they're going to move forward on decertification. I don't think that's good because we already know from the consent decree and why the consent decree is in place that CPD and other law enforcement have a tendency to be biased in favor of their officers, even when they engage in misconduct. So we need to make sure, in my opinion, there should be an amendment to the state law to correct that, okay? Because other states, they allow for independent investigations. So Illinois can do that too. Does ILESP, on its website, provide information on ongoing decertification investigations, like an open database or integrity reports that will be published on a regular basis? The answer is no. I don't know if y'all know this already, but Illinois is not really good at giving out information on what's going on with things. So, I don't know if y'all know that. That's kind of historically what's been going on in the state of Illinois, and definitely in the city of Chicago, all right? And they're continuing with that. So there needs to be a state law, an amendment to the state law to change this. But what that means is that if an officer is being investigated for decertification, you have no idea what's going on with it as a taxpayer. You can't go to LSP's website and see who's being investigated for what and what's happening. The other thing is here, does LSP provide information on decertification determinations? Meaning, we've already investigated the officer, now we have a final determination. We're either going to decertify them, not decertify them, or just temporarily suspend their license. Can you find that information anywhere? No. The only way you can get that information is through a public records request, which remember we already talked about that last time. And that can be costly. Okay, public records requests can cost a lot of money and you may not get all the information you requested. So it's easier if they just have an open database on the website, you just go to it, you can see, okay, this case, this is what the result was, boom. As a taxpayer, I know what's going on in my community, right? And then does the state law require that the police department has to check and or report to the NDI? The NDI is the National Decertification Index. This is a national database that collects data on all law enforcement in the U.S. who've been decertified from their police departments. So if an officer tries to transfer from one state to another, they can't do that if the police department goes on the NDI and sees their name as being decertified. So this database is run by an international organization called IAD-LEST. That's the acronym. I don't know the full name. But only law enforcement and post commissions like ILESP have access to that database, so the public does not, which is not good in my opinion, but it is good to know that if your state law requires that before hiring somebody, the law enforcement agency has to check that database and see if they've been decertified. That will prevent potentially bad officers from joining the force and engaging in more misconduct. And then if they also have to report when an officer is decertified to the database, that guarantees that that officer's name is there and they will not get hired at another police department that is also checking this database. So that's a good thing. Illinois does do that under state law. So that's very good. And the last thing here is, does Illinois state law provide for both automatic and discretionary decertification? Now, what this is, there are two different ways that an officer can be decertified. Most states have one or the other. Automatic means if an officer has been convicted of, pled guilty to, or pled nolo contendere, meaning that they're not going to plead guilty or not guilty, to a felony, only a felony. And I believe in Illinois, certain misdemeanors, like the most egregious misdemeanor, then you automatically lose your license. That's it. Boom, it's gone. There's no questions asked. Now, discretion and automatic can only occur if a police chief, a sheriff, or ILESP itself were to file that complaint, and file that report to initiate the decertification process. Now, discretionary decertification, I'm about to wrap it up. Discretionary decertification, that has to do with, let's say, the conduct that the officer engaged in was not criminal, but was still unethical to the badge. For instance, deactivation of body-worn cameras and dash cams, providing misrepresentations in the police report, not intervening when you're seeing another officer engaging in misconduct. These are actions that are not necessarily criminal in nature, but they're definitely unethical, okay? So discretionary decertification, that's what allows for those kinds of cases to now be eligible for decertification. So the way it works in Illinois is that if you file a complaint about an officer engaging in, let's say, unethical misconduct, there would be an administrative law judge who would be assigned to that hearing. There would be a hearing. The administrative law judge would preside over it. The accused officer would be able to provide witnesses and their case in their favor, and then you have the complaint against them. The administrative law judge would take all that information, would give it to that law enforcement certification review panel I talked about earlier that has community members on it. They would go into closed session, and then they would do it through a majority vote, decide do we think the officer should be decertified or not? And then when they make that decision, they provide a recommendation. It's a recommendation to ILESB. And then ILESB, who are not community members, former law enforcement, former prosecutors, and former judges, they make the final decision on if the officer is decertified or not. Okay, so that's the way discretionary decertification works. And Illinois does provide for both automatic and discretionary, which I think is great because that means that there's more ways for officers to be held accountable if they engage in misconduct. It's not just if you commit a felony. It's not just if you engage in unethical behavior. It's both. So there's more opportunity there to hold them to account. And that's good. That's what you want in democracy as a taxpayer. Because that's your money paying for this. Okay? So understand that. So on that note, I know I got to wrap up. What I want to just let you know about this is that I am offering teachings and workshops related to this report card. In other words, if you're interested in what I talked about today and you'd like me to dig in deeper, where I would also provide you with what I call a mini report card, where I'll have Illinois, the way you saw it here. I'll have the #1 state in the country that's graded #1 in the country on decertification. That's Washington State. They check every box you saw there except for one. And then I also include the worst state in the country, the weakest one being Ohio. Ohio only checks one box. And I also include one state that's a little bit more empowering in this language and another one that's less empowering. So you get 5 states, including Illinois. We go through compare and contrast on how their laws compare and contrast to each other. And what we'll do coming out of this is try to figure out 3 things. How can you develop a grassroots advocacy strategy so that the DCs, the civilians, CCPSA, COPA, OIG, the police board can now all work together on holding law enforcement accountable under state law. Number 2, how do you develop a strategy around administrative advocacy? In other words, ILESB can, give me 2 minutes, I'll wrap up. Hey, one minute, I'll wrap up, 1 minute. ILESB, okay, just real quick. So ILESB can easily, on their own, without a state law being changed, they can easily make their meetings hybrid. And I've actually I've raised this point with them during a rulemaking session. They can also add 2 more dates to their annual calendar so that now they have 6 meetings a year rather than 4 meetings a year. So that's something they can do through a majority vote, just changing their own bylaws and practices. They don't need state lawmakers involved in that. What they do need is for y'all and others in the state of Illinois to show up to their meetings and let them know that's what you want them to do. Because they're not going to change it on their own. They need public pressure to do it. And then the last thing that I'll do with that teaching and workshop is help you develop your strategy on legislative advocacy. Remember I talked about how the information is not being put out there, they're not doing independent investigations? You need a state law to be changed in order for that to happen. So we need a strategy behind that. So that's what I'm offering to do. And then last but not least, if you want to stay in touch, here's my contact information.
Wait a minute, hold on, give us 5
just real quick, that's my email. The website is right
We
there,
gotta do 2 things.
www.mansolutions.org. My email is empower@mansolutions.org. You can get me on social media. You can also
Just leave
get
it
that
there.
QR code if you want to go to the website. So thank you, and please do keep in touch.
All right. We just have to wrap our meeting. Just give us like 3 minutes, seriously. Also, for those that won the games, we have gifts for you. So don't leave without those. And then we have 3 things that we have to do to close out our meeting. First, we are going to read our minutes from meetings past. It's going to go quick though. Yeah.
Okay, well, here we go. So we have minutes that we have to get approved. This is part of the actual protocol of our particular meeting. First of all, give yourselves a round of applause for your patience. Yeah, well, you know what? You didn't get that age without patience, so I look forward to getting there. November 13th, we had a meeting at 720 North Laurel, and the meeting commenced at 6:25. We talked about a new transparency format and increasing the QR code information for public safety accountability. There was also anonymous concerns, similar to you being so bold about you speaking, but some people shared their information. They did not necessarily want to be identified. We talked about this particular presenter, Carlton Myers, who actually he did a Know Your Rights session at the Ruta Center, which is 5044 West Madison. and we talked about the urge for collecting information. We also talked about a young man who lost his life at Erie and Laverne after having an encounter with the police. Less than an hour later, he was dead. So sometimes, maybe getting arrested could save your life. I don't know. That's no sarcasm. That's just reality. So the district councils also co-hosted a haunted house for the children at Pickett Funeral Home, and we're talking about keeping the children off the street, but where they're going to go, talking about the various locations of where they could be. A second meeting we held, which was a special meeting, at this December 4th at 2024 at the Rudis Center, 5044 West Monmouth, and we talked about a litany of things, but the overall thing was the Baba Nubian.
2026 more than anything.
Say it again, please.
Planning for 2026.
Okay, planning for 2026 and the proposed the educator for the future sessions, things of that nature. So may I have, and domestic violence, which is very serious, and mental health. We don't know what kind of day people are having. Don't be the trigger of the button that they need pushed. May I have a motion to have these particular minutes either corrected or accepted as read?
I motion to accept our meeting minutes as read.
A second.
It has been motioned by Councilor Rudis and second by Councilor Arewa Akua. All in favor?
Aye.
Ayes have
All
it.
right. So the next session of our meeting is votes. We have no votes to take. And then the last thing we have is just to tell you when our next meeting will be, which will be January 8th of next year. Location still to be determined. We have to work that out. Again, we rotate the meetings around. So with all of you signing in and giving us your email, if you check those things, we'll at least send that out to you. And we will work on the option to put it over Zoom so that you can check in. Virtually, Zoom or whichever other virtual link may work for you. Otherwise, with that, we're going to move to close our meeting out. Again, please wait behind for those that won the games for your gift. And then we also wanted to make sure that we gave space to Chantel to be able to introduce herself to you all as well. So with that, I make a motion to end our meeting.
A second.
All right.
A motion has been granted, raised by Councilor Rudis and second by Councilor Akua. All in favor?
Aye.
Don't move. Don't move.
Real quick though, so we know who our winners are. I got Miss Barbara, Miss Bertha, Miss Jessie, Miss Lynn, Miss Austin, Miss Lynette, and then we have our two winners from the word game. So you all come up and pick one up and yes, and that's posted at our meeting. So let's give us